So is DOGE coming to Washington State? Well, I see lots and lots of comments down below on my channel about the impact of the Department of Government's efficiency being organized right now by Elon Musk over here in D.C., digging into corruption and waste in our federal government. And then usually these comments tend to include requests and then sometimes desperate pleas for this effort to actually come to my home state of Washington. Now, last week I launched this video here about what appears to be, in my opinion, the inevitable Department of Justice investigation and litigation against Washington State's Department of Licensing. And many of you were leaving comments just like that, requesting DOGE to come to the state in that recent video. But in today's video, I want to dig into this issue and then discuss what can and probably can't be done by the DOGE crew out of DC that impacts our great state of Washington, and also what local teams of DOGE-like activism can actually do, which is taking off right now as I record this video in this state as well. Now, before I jump into cutting the waste of government in Washington State, and there's a heck of a lot of it to cut, I actually want to remind you to hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. It doesn't cost you anything, but it takes a couple seconds of your time. You can also go to the links in the video description area down below if you want to subscribe to our website or support our efforts here at We the Governed. I am certain that the politicians and the bureaucrats in our state absolutely don't want you to do this. But just a little rebellion now and then is actually good for the soul, and who really listens to those guys anymore anyway? So now back to the DOGE drama in D.C. and what it means to those of us who live out here in Washington State. Now, for those living under a rock over the past few months, DOGE, which is an acronym for Department of Government Efficiency, is essentially run from the executive branch of the federal government. It's under President Donald Trump, and it appears to be primarily focused on exposing government fraud, waste, and misuse of the taxes that we actually send to the feds. Now, there are essentially two aspects of the DOGE effort in D.C., and one of them, these are kind of the scandals that surround it, but one of them is the legal constitutional separation of powers question, which is real, and there's articles about it, but it's a conversation for another day. But if you don't understand this legal question, it just basically boils down to the power of the purse, which the federal Constitution very clearly gives Congress in Article 1, Section 9, and then the concept of impoundment, which is the executive deciding to not spend money allocated by Congress for a specific reason. Now, something that was actually relatively uncontroversial until it became restricted back in the early 1970s during the Nixon administration. Now, this becomes an academic debate with real-world consequences about essentially the power of the presidency or the executive branch of government today and its ability to hire, fire, and then stop spending tax cash on waste or fraud. Now, for the wonkish ones of us who actually have been concerned about the bloat and waste of the administrative state, this is a big deal, and it's a needed legal fight which will inevitably end up in a variety of federal courts with decisions that probably clearly delineate these powers a bit better in the near future. But remember, the effort to effectively downsize a bloated federal administrative state has actually been attempted. It hasn't really been attempted in any serious way since the early 1980s during the Reagan administration here. And for those of us who believe in freedom and liberty and recognize the need to find a way to effectively shrink our bloated government, particularly bureaucracy, which just seems to grow exponentially rather right now, whether we need it or not, this is an important and big change. So while we've often been promised by various politicians over the years that they're going to go and do that, they're going to downsize the state, those promises magically never materialize when those politicians end up going to D.C. But I think this time, it actually seems to be quite a bit different. And here's where we really get into the other aspect of this whole DOGE exercise, which kind of feels more like a political movement than just another wonkish argument about the balance of constitutional powers in D.C. What I think makes this different is the speed of action and the breadth and depth of the exposure and the publicity of the waste, fraud, and problems that they're uncovering in D.C. right now. This is more than just the USAID drama or basically the federal workers who haven't showed up to their offices in many years. It's even more significant than the $4.7 trillion in federal payments that just can't be properly tracked. Every day, a new shoe drops, and we actually have a container ship of shoes to drop on the American people about the shocking waste and fraud in D.C. Now, I realize that to those of us who have had to deal with FOIA and PRA requests over the years getting public records, and we've immersed ourselves in the corruption and incompetence of government for many years, we're not surprised. And we've known many of these problems for decades, and sometimes we've written or discussed specific examples now for many years. But regardless of past political promises, no matter which political party was in power, the boat just continued to grow. The whole bloat of this state just continued to grow. However, the average person probably doesn't know this. And the media platform that DOGE and Elon Musk and Trump, frankly, bring to this drama is just unparalleled. And this public exposure is what I believe will ultimately allow them to have many of the successes that they've already experienced and seem likely to just experience in the near future. Now, this may also lead to convincing otherwise easily corrupted or already corrupted politicians in Congress to either allow the downsizing to continue or at least not be openly opposed to it, which ultimately has the potential to avoid some of the constitutional questions in the future. Now, that being said, it's always super risky to depend on politicians of any political stripe, and those in Congress can really never be trusted. But if we see some movement towards downsizing and bloated, just the entire bloated administrative state here, this is actually a good and unprecedented thing. I mean, mistakes are certainly going to be made. Good people will lose their jobs. Important projects will probably get delayed. But overall, the trend should be positive for our nation and our future generations, and certainly the U.S. dollar, assuming it actually can be saved, and then the financial trajectory of our nation. It's a rare opportunity. But now, how does this actually impact us here in Washington State? I mean, after all, we're 3,000 miles away from D.C. Frankly, very few in D.C. know we exist or pay attention to us. Our state, while it's wonderful and important to us, is typically viewed as just a backwater to the D.C. elite of both parties. Now, we're usually viewed maybe as a great place to fundraise for both political parties, but outside of airplanes, Apple, Sasquatch, the Space Needle, and perhaps software, the rest of the country hardly knows that we exist. So how will the DOGE cuts so far away actually impact us here? Well, first is actually the obvious layoffs and downsizing of federal workers in Washington State. And the biggest impact that you can expect to see will be with these unemployed, basically these people who are become unemployed by the feds, perhaps in places like the U.S. Forest Service or at the Hanford nuclear site or in various other capacities all around the state. I'd expect most stories about how these people have lost their jobs, that those are going to be what the anti-DOGE folks primarily focus on. You'll see it in the traditional media. This is generally an effective strategy to help convince some people that these jobs in particular shouldn't be cut. And everyone can feel sympathy for the federal employee who graduated from Evergreen State College and was planning to spend her life maybe counting butterflies in the forest. And I'm actually sorry that that dream won't happen now. It absolutely sucks to lose your job, and rejoining the workforce is actually very disruptive and challenging for most people. But to quote the left, who openly mocked forest workers, pulp mill workers, farmers, small business owners, and other workers who also lost their jobs due to government policies, you can just learn to code, or at least that's what they always told us at the time. However, there can be direct financial impacts in communities who actually depend on federal paychecks to be recycled into their local economy. And with those federal cash spigots and paychecks drying up, there are always going to be economic ripple effects. They will be disruptive, and nobody should ignore this or pretend that it isn't happening. It is, and it will. The less obvious direct impacts to Washington State will be the billions of dollars that are going to be getting cut from the federal grant grifting operations that are basically all over our state. And this category of federal dollars getting cut off by our state that generates far less sympathy from people like me who basically want the bloated bureaucracy to be reduced. So many grant recipients are awarded the cash for unaudited, unaccountable, and often basically harmful programs that are wasteful, damaging, and at best, they're just entirely useless to us. Now, it doesn't matter if these grant kickbacks are to help facilitate more drug addicts on the streets of Seattle, or they're used to promote failing greenwash jobs that don't actually help the environment, or maybe drag time story hour, or if they're just the political equivalent of bribes covered by a thin veneer of justification. We should actually celebrate the fact that this waste is going away. It is our tax dollars, and we shouldn't be spending them on things like that. Now, again, I'm certain that people will lose jobs because of this, but in most cases, these were absolutely jobs that we didn't need, even if it sucks for the individual people who are losing their paychecks. And to repeat myself just a little here, there will always be areas of our state where the grift going away will have a significant real-world financial impact because there's been just so much of it shoveled out the door over the past few years. Everything counts in large amounts, and when it disappears, it will be noticed. But I suspect that this takes months and years to really completely take effect. Now, what about the drama that we're witnessing right now in Washington State in regards to our homegrown DOGE efforts? Well, first, I don't really like using the term Department of Government Efficiency in Washington State for these efforts because that program under that name is essentially a federal national issue. And while many state-level projects, they recycle federal cash through their programs, we actually do a pretty good job in Washington State wasting and squandering our own tax dollars without any federal help. But the term DOGE has become shorthand for this type of exposure, so I'm going to go with it for now. Now, recently, there have actually been some great DOGE Washington sleuths that have been uncovering many questionable expenditures in our state. And I've linked to a very popular video down below in our video description area, and it's here from Brandy Cruz, who put out a video a few days ago which discussed this effort. It's a great video here. By the way, I definitely encourage you to watch this video because she provides a large number of very specific examples of the just stupid waste of our tax dollars in Washington State. Ari Hoffman, a friend of mine and a popular talk show host in Seattle, has also been discussing this quite a bit recently, and he frequently also provides a lot of specific examples. They aren't alone, but it is becoming a very popular pastime for so many of us. So mostly this is an effort that's one of public exposure, which is super critical and is very helpful if we actually want to change anything in the near future. But please remember, this is hardly by itself the same thing that we're seeing back in DC. I mean, the biggest and most obvious difference is the fact that the homegrown DOGE efforts in Washington State, they're not a government officially approved action here. And that's why this guy wouldn't like it, which means it's essentially people in Washington State like me, like you maybe, like Ari Hoffman and others, like many others, who are basically exposing information that we can find from public records. Now, this is excellent and important work, but essentially this is just the first part of the process if you actually want things to change. The publicity of these wasteful grifting operations, insider kickback schemes, and flat-out fraud, it's actually very helpful to inspire change. But basically, that by itself, that's not going to make it disappear. Well, there are many times when the traditional media, like King 5 News or the Seattle Times, accidentally commits surprising acts of journalism. Those acts are becoming a rare thing today. For the most part, with very few exceptions, they will never dig into government waste, fraud, or abuse because these organizations themselves are generally they're basically compromised, either with their often political alignment, the open alignment they have with the politicians in office, or because they are also direct recipients of grants from the government themselves. See Senate Bill 5400 as an example of this type of media bribery and influence from our state's government today. Now, so the local DOGE-like efforts by citizens and activists and others to expose the local waste and fraud, that's going to be spreading their message via social media and non-traditional media operations like ours, or places like We the Governed, or maybe other places out there. I used to do this when I worked at the Freedom Foundation many years ago. You're actually going to see a lot more people doing this now, however, than you've ever seen in the past. Partially, it's that we'll no longer be a voice in the wilderness discussing this topic. So I want to thank the DOGE DC crew for actually making this process cool again, because it never was before. Instead of it being kind of just a small insider crew that was aware of the problems and then why they matter, it actually appears that a lot of people care today, which is excellent. I mean, historically, exposing government waste, fraud, and abuse, this was a great way to put your friends and your coworkers to sleep and then have the audience's eyes glaze over if they were paying any attention anymore. That's something that's changed, and it's a big deal. It's good to expose the weirdness and the craziness of how our state and local governments, they too just treat your tax dollars like monopoly funny money to spread around to their crony friends. And then, of course, they waste it as they see fit. Knowing that until now, nobody really cared, and it's a big deal that they care now. Now, do you want to actually get in on the local volunteer DOGE effort? And you probably wonder, of course, how you can do this. Now, start paying attention to those public records that you might be getting if you're already engaged or involved, or what you can find in the various government websites around the state today. I'm sure that they're going to start censoring and shutting down those sources of information soon, but for now, they usually brag about their waste and kickbacks. They don't call it that, of course, but they're proud of how they squander your tax dollars, and they like giving it to their political allies. But how do you start to do this? With a little experience, it can actually become easy. And I'll close this video here with just a couple of very specific details. But keep in mind, these examples are essentially the tip of the iceberg for the waste that you can actually help to uncover and expose in our state. So here's just one example. Go to the public disclosure website here. It's pdc.wa.gov. Now, linked here, I'm going to have it also linked down below in the video description. You go to the for voters and the public box right here, and you click on the political disclosure reports link, which is right here where that arrow is pointing. Then, of course, you go to the next screen and you just type in the name of the politician on your short list to look at. You can search for them by name on the PDC website right here. Now, if they've run for multiple offices or run multiple times, you just pick one of the recent years or the positions that interest you for them. And then you go to their financial affairs documents. You have to go to this where the arrow's pointing down here. You have to click right there. Once you do that, you're actually going to see that the last 3 or 4 years or more of reports, and you can actually see that they're hosted right there on the site. You can just download them. Now, what are you looking for? Well, you're looking to see if they're spouses or if they are collecting income from other sources outside their government job. Look at the name of that organization and then see if that organization, profit or nonprofit, it doesn't really matter. You want to see if the grift comes from basically the government. And then see if that organization has taken government funding or maybe grants over the past few years. Usually they have, and this is a good use of time, your time, to find what may not be formally illegal right now, but which most people are going to recognize as the grifting operations that most of these things, unfortunately, have become. Now, another idea, if you think that politicians if you think a specific one you're looking at, if you think that he hasn't reported the truth about their other income, see if you can find evidence in their social media posts or maybe at the Secretary of State's corporate and charity searches, which I've got linked up here on the screen, to see if that politician is linked up with companies or maybe they're board members or governors, as they call them on the Secretary of State website, and then see if that is actually being reported in their financial affairs documents. Oftentimes, they attempt to hide this information, and that is always worthy of a PDC investigation. I'm talking about the Public Disclosure Commission, and I'm very happy to file those complaints, something that I do on a regular basis when you find them. You can actually go down to my website down below, and I've got this kind of screen grab from the front, and you can see the hundreds of politicians, PACs, judges, and others who I've helped expose over recent years for violations just like this. You will note that because of this effort on my part, over $640,000 in fines have been issued, and I don't need to have any type of monopoly on this process. I'm happy to have more people doing this. Now, if you want more advanced strategies, maybe organizing a group of 20 or more people where you can basically near where you live or who are willing to work on this type of research on a local project, I'm always happy to come out and train activists and activist teams on how to actually dig deeper with just a bit more sophistication and some strategy to get to the real dirt on how your tax dollars are wasted in your community. Fraud and tax abuse, your abuse of your tax dollars, it's absolutely happening where you live right now, right where you live. It doesn't matter, red state or blue state. Trust me, unfortunately, it just doesn't matter. Although the blue states, they do tend to be more blatant and openly wasteful, there's no reason that we all can't be part of our own DOGE efforts where we live. Now, I'm in discussions right now with some other activists around the state to perhaps organize a formal training camp in maybe a month or so, and then invite you and all the others who might be interested in doing this work. But the details and logistics have yet to be firmed up. This is actually something that I'll probably confirm next week. But let me know in the comments section down below if that interests you, and I'll plan accordingly and make it very public soon. Exposing the truth is really the first step to growing public awareness, and you can certainly help where you live, but you will have to be willing to show up and do more than just watch a video like this. You're not alone. Many people are doing this, and you can get in on the fun and make a difference as well, because, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.